So welcome everyone for this second plenary session. I want to start making two announcements. The first one is to say that yesterday's record sessions are now available online. You just need to go to the lecture rooms and look at yesterday's tab. And another announcement I would like to make is that after this session, we're going to have a time allocating the program for the poster sessions. So participants, feel free to go to the poster hall and enter the poster booths. The presenters are going to be available there to answer questions you have about the posters. You can see the poster videos. It's actually a very nice different way for poster presentation. So I hope you all gonna attend. Okay, so now I'm here to introduce our plenary speaker. I'm here to introduce Anil Arora. He's Chief Statistician of Canada. He has this post since 2016. He has worked at Statistic Canada for over 25 years. During these years, he has led innovative projects and programs, including being part of important international initiatives, working with United Nations and OECD, and has received numerous prestigious awards for leadership. He currently serves on a number of boards and is active in community events and social causes. He has a Bachelor of Science from the University of Alberta, and he holds a graduate certificate in public sector management and governments from the University of Ottawa and also the Governments of Canada Advanced Leadership Development Program. So Anil, welcome, and you have 45 minutes. I forgot saying something important. So during his talk, feel free to ask questions through the Q&A facility. And then at the end of his talk, I'm gonna collect the questions and we may unmute your phone to ask Anil directly questions. Anil, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope I'm coming through clearly. I want to start off by obviously congratulating you all and obviously the ONS, the Economic Society. This is truly a great event and a great initiative to bring us all together virtually. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever your situation might be. And it really is an honor to represent Statistics Canada at this important event, and two, to really move this relationship and this collaboration between our two organizations going forward. So as was mentioned, I have just under an hour. I'm going to go through quite a bit of stuff, and I'm going to go through it quite quickly. I've also been having some internet problems today, so I'm just going to shut the video off because I want you to focus on the slides as well rather than on me. And hopefully we can have a short Q&A and an interactive session at the end of this thing. So I'm going to ask my colleague to put the first slide up and see if we can get this show on the road. All right. So firstly, you know, I plan to just scratch the surface of our ambition at the agency's modernization agenda with a real focus, obviously, today on our economic statistics program. And I'll also talk about the future of economic statistics. And you'll see I'm going to try and bring in some examples, try and talk a little bit about the leadership role that we're doing internationally and domestically as well. And I know that many other organizations, including the ONS, are doing similar things. So let me start. Always a good idea to start with some history, one that's enmeshed with the history of economic statistics and the history of our own country's national statistical system. And our journey started during the winter of 1665, 1666. Yes, Canada goes back that far. In a country then called Nouvelle France. Jean Talon was the first intendant of New France, and he faced, as you can imagine, at that time, many daunting challenges. And yet over his 5-year tenure, the population in Canada climbed from 3,200 to 7,600. Impressive gains, as you can imagine there in relative terms. Talon visited settlers on horseback, and he used his knowledge that he gained from the 1666 census, the first in North America, to help it flourish. And Talon created a program whereby young women who came to be then known as the filles du roi, or king's daughters, could emigrate from France under the sponsorship of then the king then. This was to encourage marriage and population of the colony. And he also diversified the economy by establishing a lumber trade and manufactories to produce wool and textile products. And obviously much has changed since 1666, which is a good thing, because as we embark on the 2021 census, I really have no intentions to visit the country on horseback. But much has also remained the same. The census and all of the agency's programs continue to support informed decision-making and provide the world with statistics, obviously in some small way towards a betterment of humanity. So let me fast forward to the Great Depression. Politicians, economists, and citizens around the world struggled to understand how and why the world economy had collapsed, and more importantly, how it could be reinvigorated, not unlike all of us here today in light of COVID-19. In the 1930s, the Dominion Bureau of Statistics, which is what we were known as back then, now Statistics Canada, did a fine job of, I would say, tallying industrial and agricultural production, the sort of the key drivers of the economy of the day. But efforts to integrate these data into a coherent whole were described as, well, hodgepodge. That was both meaningless and at times even misleading. So what we needed back then was a system of national economic accounts. And in fact, in the fall of 1944, not long after, experts from the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada held discussions on the development of this theoretical framework for national income statistics, which was then referred to as the tripartite discussions. And the outcome was a system of national accounts to which Canada was one of the early adopters. And the first national accounts were presented to the general public in April of 1946. And the results showed that the Canadian gross domestic national product had more than doubled from 5.1 billion in 1938 to 11.7 billion in 1944. But in fact, that growth was, well, it was not uniform across the country. And armed with this data, the federal government of the day was able to implement a system of equalization payments among the provinces so that no region would really be left behind. The beginnings of that international standard for national accounting, in fact, can be traced back to a report published in Geneva in 1947 by the subcommittee of the League of Nations, the Committee of Statistical Experts. And under the leadership of Richard Stone, once again from the UK, Canada participated in those discussions, as did statisticians from the US, Australia, the Netherlands, the United States, Mexico, Norway, and Switzerland. And in fact, it would take many years to develop, with the first quarterly national accounts appearing in 1954. Then there are experimental statistics. We might think that this notion is quite a la mode and new these days, but in fact, it's not new. The first experimental IO tables, input-output tables, were produced for the year 1949 and were in fact released in 1956. They were broken down into 42 industries. And back in the 1950s, the IO analysis gained popularity for two main reasons. One, it shed light on the intermediate transactions. And two, it could also verify national account statistics, since every piece of input datum had to match up with its companion, of course, on the output side. And these accounts required an enormous amount of source data about the output and the intermediate consumption of Canadian business establishments and the final consumption expenditures of institutional sectors. And our entire business survey system, in fact, had to be redefined and redesigned. It then became clear that both better classifications and survey frames were needed because business surveys were, in fact, not well integrated. The advent of computers helped both the development of the IO tables and the timeliness of publications. The initial focus was on statistics of employment and payroll, imports and exports, retail trade, and industrial production. And according to 1968 survey by a task force on government information, respondents criticized the timeliness, usefulness, clarity, and accessibility of our data. We still face some of that criticism today. The quarterly accounts were being released with a 90-day lag, which was a good deal slower in the United States for the same data. We're often compared to them. And the time has since been reduced to 60 days. There was also a massive push to improve the accuracy of our estimates. Growth in the early 70s was rapid, and the recession in the mid-70s was shallower. In those days, we had no tax-based benchmarks for compensation of employees, and the national accounts depended entirely on an establishment-based employment survey. But in late 1970s, we gained access to payroll deduction information, and it showed compensation of employees was in fact much larger in the 1970s or in the early 70s than we had estimated. So we revised up the GDP growth estimates, even though they were already relatively high for that period. The Bank of Canada was dismayed by the revision, believing they'd been misled by those earlier estimates. They were facing a lot of criticism that their efforts to dampen inflationary pressures had not been as aggressive as they should have been. In the late 80s and 90s, an initiative of Statistics Canada led to informal and voluntary meetings of representatives from national statistical agencies to address selected problems in the statistical methods. And these engagements have become formally known as city groups, named after the place where they held their first meeting. The Warwick Group on Service Statistics was hosted by the Netherlands Statistical Office in January of 1987. 9 countries and 6 agencies gathered to discuss an internationally acceptable classification for service industries. The 1990s were marked by the optimization, integration, and harmonization of our various business statistics programs and the underlying infrastructure. In 1996, the Government of Canada and the Government of New Brunswick, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Nova Scotia agreed to harmonize their sales taxes. This was then the impetus to the birth of the project to improve provincial economic statistics. And its goal was to produce IO accounts and income and expenditure accounts for all our 13 provinces and territories in the country. And the result was the integration of economic statistics at the provincial and national levels. The agency needed to develop an annual interprovincial trade data, implement a new classification system, and double the scope of the business register, include zero business employee businesses. And this added about 1 million businesses to our business register. In the early 2010s, the Integrated Business Statistics Program was launched to further push the level of integration and encompass more economic programs within the agency. And this IBSB, this Integrated Business Statistics Program, provides a unique, standardized and generic processing framework from collection to dissemination, and a set of common tools, methods, standards, and systems for the various economic surveys that are conducted at Statistics Canada. And by 2021, nearly 130 economic programs will be integrated into this IBSB. So the examples above speak to the adoption of integrated frameworks and standards, to the production of timelier and more granular information, to collaboration and efficient governance, to the responsiveness of the statistical system, and to the need for accurate information to guide decision-making. And these are the exact same drivers for our current modernization agenda within the agency. In 2013-2014, the economic statistics field was created by merging the business and trade statistics with the macroeconomic accounts branch. The creation of this new field and subsequent mergers have helped improve data quality, they've increased analytic output, and they better now respond to emerging data needs, moving the field significantly towards achieving these goals. So here we are today in 2020. And for the last few years, Statistics Canada has faced an unprecedented number of changes and budget pressures, necessitating the continuing quest for efficiencies. And again, I know that we're not unique in that regard as an NSO. Centralization of internal services throughout the federal government have resulted in centralization outside of the agency in areas such as training, IT provisioning and services, and so on. And this rationalization across the public service has posed challenges that we faced with innovation and collaboration as responses. So let's talk about information. Information abounds, as you know, on the internet, whether we're talking about information that's directly constructed to inform or information that can be gleaned from structuring and linking it systematically. And without needing to exert the response burden through single purpose surveys, as you know, artificial intelligence and machine learning, when used properly and responsibly, can in fact make sense of social, environmental, and economic linkages to answer new and emerging questions that are leading to more detailed, accurate, and timelier data published at lower cost to the agency, and of course, reducing responses burden to our businesses. Data may be produced from sensors that can illuminate the impact of society on the environment, or using elements of the environment like water to understand human health and well-being, and I'll talk about that a little bit more a bit later. Big data gives rise to timelier, richer, more relevant data used to improve or supplement our existing programs and to answer new questions about ourselves and our economy and our society. The need for good quality facts and data in a society where we are seeing massive changes, I would argue, has never been greater. I'm talking about challenges like globalization, the emergence of the digital and platform economies. I'm talking about climate change and about shifting demographics, and of course, the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic. How do these impact different groups, geographic locations, industries, and sectors? The need for breakdown by neighborhood and by community level data, by disaggregate and target groups has never been more important, and not what happened 2 years ago or historically as a trend, but in fact, what's happening in real time today. There are a number of reasons for this, as you know. To start, there's been a dramatic shift in how our populations and Canadians in our context receive information. There is a decline of traditional news sources and a proliferation of information from other means, such as big data, through web scraping, geospatial visualization, and of course, the almighty social media. Not all data sources available are of equal or even good quality, nor do they all take measures to protect privacy. And these data do not always tell the whole story. For example, to truly understand the barriers faced by specific population groups, like in our case, Black Canadians or Indigenous peoples, we need detailed data on employment, on income, health, and justice, disaggregated by socio-demographic group. And our agency is responding to these challenges by experimenting with new data sources, modeling, and collection techniques such as crowdsourcing and rapid surveys. We also need to maintain public trust while doing all this, which is derived from clear independence as Canada's National Statistical Office. And statistics are produced with neutral, objective methods, and outputs are accessible to everyone. Canadians need to understand that these statistical data are not in any way subject to political pressure, and they don't serve specific interests. In fact, we know we've done our job when even those who question their government still quote our statistics and, in fact, complete our surveys and the census. And of course, there's Canada's digital economy, which continues to grow faster than the rest of the economy, is bigger than some of our country's most staple industries, such as mining, forestry, and the oil and gas sectors. In fact, Canada's digital economy was worth $109.7 billion in 2017, or about 5.5% of the entire economy just for that year. More than 850,000 people work in this sector, a figure that has grown by nearly 40% in just a few short years back from 2010. And we've been working with the OECD and the international community on ways to measure and define various aspects of the digital economy, from its reflection in the GDP to the definition of labor in the age of gig work. Because as Canada's National Statistical Agency, I believe it is our role to measure these challenges and these changes so Canadians are well positioned to make evidence-based decisions. And this became quickly apparent in the current context, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, where key health data were quite literally vital to life and death. There was a need for timely, basic information on COVID-19 confirmed cases and deaths, but we had to overcome delays and complete missing data, varying definitions across our various jurisdictions and levels of government. There was a need for socio-demographic detail to assess the impact of the pandemic on our vulnerable populations, and we needed data such as outbreak detection, testing, and availability of personal protective equipment. And we had to make tough choices and shift our priorities to meet the information needs of Canadians during this time of crisis. In fact, we were showing our abilities and using our data steward role and our expertise just as much as we were providing data and insights. And our work is ongoing and informed by a culture of outreach and engagement. And in this context, we're doing several things. We're developing deep subject matter expertise. Staff have to keep abreast of emerging phenomena and the statistical concepts and the techniques to measure how these phenomena are changing. We're training a new generation of experts. We're developing mechanisms and tools to promote knowledge, transfer, and retention, and to accelerate that learning curve. We're enhancing organizational efficiency and collaboration. The merger of the business trade statistics with the macroeconomic accounts that I mentioned earlier created the necessary conditions to improve organizational efficiency and collaboration between subject matter areas. We're addressing emerging data needs. One of our main challenges is that emerging data needs outpace our capacity and resources to address them. So to make progress on this front, we're establishing a more rigorous process to identify and prioritize these emerging data needs. And clearly, outreach with data users to establish what are the most pressing needs is going to be critical. We're improving access to statistical programs. Clearly, we publish many topics, and I would say suppression for confidentiality greatly limits the usefulness of that data. The relevance of statistical output is in fact enhanced by minimizing suppressions. That goes to the risk-averse culture, and yet the methodologies and the science that we need to protect confidentiality and privacy. We're using technology as an enabler to address declining response rates and increasing survey costs. We've been finding and exploiting alternate methods and sources like many of you. New technology is providing new data sources and greater efficiency in terms of processing and storing data. And I think it will facilitate interaction with Canadians and create different options for disseminating data. In Canada and on a global scale, the economic statistics systems need to transform as fast as our economies and the demands of policymakers as they evolve. And I think you will agree they're evolving quite rapidly. The integration of our country's economies and the interdependence of increasing complex issues have led us to assess the current system and to adapt it to the times. So let me say a few words on the work done by the UN Friends of the Chair Group on economic statistics. Already 12 months before COVID-19 became apparent, the Friends of the Chair Group, or the FOCG, was created by the 50th session of the UN Statistical Commission. And the Commission tasked the Friends of the Chair Group with assessing the efficiency, effectiveness, and responsiveness of the current system of economic statistics by engaging the statistical and user community. And this group was also asked to take stock of the governance arrangements of existing statistical groups and initiatives and provide recommendations on working methods and updates to the system of economic statistics. And I have the privilege of facilitating and chairing this group, and the ONS is an important contributor to this work. We made steady progress in assessing the system of economic statistics, guided by the extensive consultations at both the national and the international levels. I have to say the response was quite heartening and unequivocal. Data users and policymakers expect near real-time information with breakdown by community, neighborhood, and demographic characteristics. They expect economic statistics to be integrated with social and environmental components. And they want information that is timely, not indicators that take 3-5 years of global consultations to get off the ground. It is not just about the what, it is about the so what and the now what. One of the key aspects being looked at by this important group is the governance of the economic statistics system. And look, this is Statistics Canada's view of the system. And so we've tried to document the system from our perspective. I think you can see it's quite daunting. Governance is spread out over a range of different organizations, and it's conducted through a variety of arrangements. Improvements in integration and coherence have taken place over time, but really the governance linkages are often informal and they're dependent on personalities and expertise. The consultation process showed that there was little appetite for major change to the governance and arrangements. So nobody wanted more structure, more governance. But there was also a view that arrangements were rigid and slow to respond, and that there was a need for more coordination, consolidation, and communication. The solutions that were proposed indicated better communication, shared priorities, and shared membership in research, priority setting through a global forum, and platforms for the chairs of all the existing groups to enhance synergies and avoid duplication of work. And we're exploring, of course, how the COVID-19 response could inform these recommendations going forward. The Friends of the Chair group identified several priority areas for updating the system of economic statistics, and they include digitalization, globalization, economic well-being, economic inequalities, sustainability, climate change, intangible assets, urbanization, and the informal sector, just to name a few. Every single priority touches on economic, social, and environmental development. Members agree that the economic statistical system faces the same changes and challenges I talked about earlier. The role of the NSOs shifting from data producers to data stewards, the volume of data and the number of data producers, the rapidly evolving and intertwined needs of users across the economic, social, and environmental dimensions, and of course, the emergence of new techniques, new tools, and new infrastructure. And in this environment, I'd argue it's vital to ensure the system is receptive to rapid change. While the Modernization of Economic Statistics program was off to a good start, this pandemic has forced Statistics Canada and, of course, other NSOs to accelerate their modernization efforts. NSOs have proven they can pivot quickly. And they can, in fact, provide data in real time. There is an expectation that NSOs maintain this ability because there is a new business model or operational framework that is emerging. And so let me spend a few minutes going over this framework. We believe that it's comprised of 4 interrelated and mutually reinforcing building blocks. And the first block is collaboration and user consultation. A modern system of economic statistics could not be user-centric without an ongoing dialogue, both at the national and the regional and global levels, between NSOs, international organizations, and academics. We could not meet the demand for real-time, granular, and contextualized information without a high degree of collaboration. And I would say that this is especially true in the context of globalization. Economic statistics, I think you would agree with me, colleagues, is in fact a team sport. Communication mechanisms should be put in place to enhance statistical literacy when new methodologies, data sources, and collection techniques are developed and adopted for the release of experimental statistics. These mechanisms should educate the user in new ways of producing and releasing statistics and explaining why traditional time series are from time to time discontinued. The second block covers the institutional arrangement and governance that NSOs have adopted in the current COVID-19 response. Elements of this building block include the institutional environment in which NSOs should operate and the role and approach they are taking. For example, data stewardship and being user-centric. Many NSOs are currently being asked to support or even lead the development of national data architectures. Innovation and developing iterative and experimental statistics allow NSOs and international organizations to remain relevant and lean, but experimentation should not impact the trust and the robustness of the methodologies. And other items of this building block are the need to balance the various data quality aspects in our production process. So for example, timeliness, accuracy, and the granularity that I spoke about, to meet new needs and to adopt and promote a whole of system approach with increased collaboration. It also means cultivating an enduring networking relationship with data providers, both administrative and private data. And in the future of economic statistics, data providers and other data producers and aggregators should in fact be seen as partners, not necessarily as competitors to NSOs. The third building block is the adoption of renewed statistical infrastructure operations and data solutions. And this means applying new technologies for new data sources, administrative data, satellite, sensors, open data, web scraping, scanners, metadata from cell phones, credit card data, et cetera, and these new data collection methods. So I'll talk a little bit later on about some of the crowdsourcing that we've been undertaking in response to the current crisis. The fourth block is deciding on the use of the appropriate statistical framework and the methodologies in which to present data solutions. Context and perspective are really, really important, especially when data are used for wider dissemination. The economy, society, and the environment are all interrelated, and the need shows this interplay, and that is so poignant today. We need to adapt our methods as well. A lot of the indicators we're developing are based on high frequency indicators that have a much shorter time span than our regular economic indicators. The statistical response to the current crisis seem to merit a broad framework for the future of economic statistics, one that involves measuring things more holistically at both the micro and the macro levels. This broader measurement framework calls for collaboration to get access to microdata and to statistical registers. So in the next portion of this presentation, I want to provide some concrete examples of initiatives for the different blocks to show how Statistics Canada is positioning its economic statistics program for the future. And I'll argue that the ONS could do exactly the same thing along with so many other statistical agencies. So we're not unique in this. It's about really gleaning the lessons learned. So let me start with trucking. Trucking is a massive industry in Canada. It's at the very heart of supply chains, transporting essential raw materials, intermediate good production, and of course, finished products. Every day, countless trucks across the US-Canada border, largest border across in the world, often multiple times at various stages of production of goods and across the provinces and territories of Canada. A single car sees product go back and forth dozens of times before it comes together. Final domestic demand is satisfied, of course, by this industry. The pandemic has illustrated the vulnerability of this sector to disruption at a time when the prevailing view is that there is a severe shortage of truck drivers, reflected in unfilled positions of some 20,000 drivers in 2019 alone. The economic activity of trucking reverberates through every aspect of our society, including our carbon footprint, greenhouse gas emissions. So finding sources of data and capitalizing on things like GPS-equipped fleets is a feature of our modernization effort. GPS satellite data allow a data flow to real-time data in trucking, construction, and agricultural applications, and to enable access to real-time data that is used to illuminate new indicators, better indicators, faster indicators, and linkages with other externalities like the consequences for the environment and energy that in fact weren't previously possible. GPS devices are connected to satellites to identify real-time positions of trucks. The information is transmitted to GPS service providers through the wireless network. Reports or data are made available to the carriers for their fleet management applications, and the GPS data can be provided by the GPS service providers or directly collected from those carriers. Trucks almost by default are tracked by fleet management systems that generate millions of data points using pings that define a truck with a time and location stamp. And analyzing the sequence of pings allows us to understand the truck behavior and drive key events like stops for commodity loading or unloading, border crossings, or the use of road infrastructure or corridors right across this country. With this ability to link records, we have a multitude of different high potential data products for expansion, new indicators, a holistic enrichment in statistics of the environment program, energy, and agriculture, just to name a few. So for instance, combining GPS data and Statistics Canada's business register and survey data, including the new freight trucking statistics and the for-hire trucking survey, these allow the modeling of very detailed information on the movements of goods by trucking, like the origin and destination of shipments and the type of commodity, without adding any response to Canadian companies. Let me move on to another example. And traditionally, statistics on international trade have focused on measuring the value and the types of products exchanged between countries. Very rich, detailed, and timely information supported by the harmonized classification system of goods are available on how much and what we trade with the rest of the world. And this rich data set enables to identify products of very specific nature given the depth of the classification. So in a context such as, again, COVID, this information is being leveraged to better understand the extent of trade in personal protective equipment and information on the supply use dynamics of this vital product. And as a complement to this rich data, there is a need to better understand the nature of firms that are engaged in international trade, their numbers and their characteristics. This type of information is in fact now vital to informing policy decisions which aim at growing our own and other countries' international trade activity and providing proper support to firms in the context as the pandemic. Firms can be profiled in terms of their employment size or location, where they are, in our case, provinces or municipalities, their industrial activities, For example, whether they export to one or multiple countries, providing insights into the level of diversification of traders in the country. This product revealed, for example, that less than 1% of the Canadian business population are exporters of goods, and that international trade is fairly concentrated in Canada, with nearly 90% of this activity attributable to a relatively small number of enterprises that both export and import goods. The annual information on characteristics of exporters was used as a basis to create a new monthly product to provide Canadians with more timely and relevant information on the impacts of COVID on exporters in the country, and to better inform the pace of recovery on a monthly basis by employment size, province, and by industry. Moving on to wastewater. I talked about this earlier. Statistics Canada has been working to update its statistical programs to better capture the social and economic impacts related to the legalization of cannabis. In our country, that took place on October 17th of 2018, and to the misuse of opioids and other drugs with higher risks of being abused. In order to measure the household consumption expenditure of Canadians on cannabis, or the contribution of the cannabis industry to the GDP and the evolution over time, an aggregate measure of the total use of cannabis, both illegal and legal, was essential. But accurate measures of total societal use of cannabis and misused drugs are difficult to obtain from traditional methods for obvious reasons. The stigma associated with use and reluctance to disclose purchases from non-regulated suppliers are just two factors that contribute to some of that underreporting on our traditional surveys. In March of 2018, we implemented a pilot project to collect and test municipal wastewater for traces of cannabis and a dozen other drugs to examine if the resulting data could in fact be used to make estimates of the extent of drug use in different cities across this country and changes in use over time. And that pilot test is the largest ever conducted in North America in terms of the size of the population that was covered. The advantages of this technique include its low cost, the timeliness, the ability to monitor change over time at the city level, and importantly, the potential to determine the total amount of a drug consumed, whether legally or illegally acquired. And that pilot project, in our case, covered 14 wastewater treatment plants in 5 large urban centers across our country and served close to 8.4 million people, about 20% of our population. Wastewater from each site was sampled at least every 30 minutes for 7 consecutive days, starting on the second Monday of each month from March 2018 to February 2019. And these wastewater samples were analyzed by one of our universities in Montreal, McGill. And when cannabis is consumed, as you may know, whether by smoking, eating, applying to skin, the body converts the main psychoactive compound, THC, into a variety of related non-psychoactive compounds, the most common and stable of which is THC-COOH. And since this compound is only created in the body after cannabis consumption, in the wastewater, you can see the indications of cannabis consumption within the service area. The total annual cannabis consumption in Canada is estimated at 84 tons of dried product within this pilot area, and the value of 84 tons implies that consumption in the pilot cities represents about 13% of the national total, as estimated by one of our agencies. And given that the pilot site comprised over 22% of the national population, this would mean that the consumption rate across the pilot sites was approximately 50% lower than that for the rest of the country. But the precision of the estimates comes with some considerable uncertainty due primarily to the wide range of estimates in how much this THC-COOH ends up in wastewater after consumption. And the results obtained here demonstrate that further refinement of the wastewater model inputs, in fact, may make it possible to use this technique to produce independent and sufficiently accurate estimates of total cannabis use at the societal level. So we're building on this project and we're experimenting its applicability with COVID prevalence. I would say it's still a little early to see if we can obtain quality results, but it's certainly worth investing at an experimental stage. Let me move on to our traditional crop survey estimates. We're using a range of collection methods for other projects. In April 2019, Statistics Canada set a goal to move beyond a survey-first approach by replacing survey data with data from administrative sources. We are modernizing our agriculture statistics program with a project to reduce the response burden on farmers to as close to zero as possible by 2026. We'll call it the Ag Zero project. In July 2019, we produced estimates on the number of temporary foreign workers in the agriculture sector in Canada using data from our Canadian Revenue Agency and Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. And these estimates were produced with absolutely zero direct contact with farmers. We also created a new model for the July 2019 field crop survey in Manitoba, one of our provinces, using advanced technologies and administrative data. And the new model, which uses satellite imagery and weather and crop insurance data to estimate crop yields, means the survey has fewer questions for respondents. And of course, that saves valuable time for farmers. And our goal is to expand this model to all our provinces, as many as we possibly can by 2022, depending on the availability, of course, of that administrative data. But it certainly holds a lot of prospect. Let me move on to flash estimates. As I mentioned, we're trying to find innovative ways to provide economic data. Users expect credible and real-time measures of the socioeconomic impact of the current pandemic and are ready to accept larger revisions to macroeconomic measures down the road if in fact necessary, to the advantage of timeliness. And to provide faster economic information during this pandemic, we've been releasing flash estimates for some critical economic statistics, such as monthly GDP, building permits, industrial product price index, and international investment, retail trade, and manufacturing shipments. And this is the kind of data I think you will agree is useful at this unprecedented time. We're utilizing our analysis and modeling capabilities to release as much data and as early as possible so that we can get a better sense of the impacts of the virus in a coherent and coordinated fashion and to be able to track the situation as it evolves. The integration of high-frequency data indicators, I think, is the key. The flash estimates give preliminary figures between 20 and 50 days earlier than our official estimates. Preliminary GDP figures by industry are now released approximately 30 days after the end of the reference month, as opposed to 60 days when we produce the official numbers. And this approach combines qualitative and quantitative information from about 200 or so industries and uses advanced releases from feeder programs like retail, manufacturing, and construction sectors. And the key success factors, I think, have been to rely on our subject matter workforce. We're also able to use existing statistical data, early reporters, publicly released facts, media releases and statements by businesses and governments to help us achieve this objective. The production of flash estimates, I would say, has been unanimously acclaimed by our users, and it comes from the National Statistical Agency. Therefore, it comes with credibility given our numbers. Let me move on to our provincial economic activity indices. In Canada, the severity of the impact of COVID has varied across our provinces and territories, and this has led to, of course, economic restrictions. Currently, timely statistics that capture the broad economic impacts of these restrictions are hard to find. Under the traditional production model, the provincial economic impacts of COVID-19 and post-pandemic recovery, well, we wouldn't see them until about May of next year. In April, data users and policymakers turned to us to get a more timely, credible measure of subnational or provincial economic impacts. The ideal solution, of course, would have been to create provincial territorial economic accounts on a quarterly or even a monthly basis. But of course, the solution would take time and money. A much less expensive alternative is to create a new experimental program of monthly provincial composite economic indicators. In fact, it's inspired by the monthly US economic indicator produced by the Chicago Federal Reserve. The experimental economic activity indexes address the data gap and are created using advanced statistical methods rather than a more traditional national accounting approach. 4 different approaches are being used to create an economic activity index and these are a simpler linear regression model, a principal component analysis, least absolute shrinkage and selection operator, and a weighted average of the first 2 methods. Different approaches are being considered because there is no optimal or commonly accepted statistical method for combining multiple data series into one index for all our provinces and our territories. The strategies adopted are absolutely transparent about the strengths and the weaknesses of each approach, and they identify the approaches that yield fit for use series for each province and territory. The study does not identify a preferred approach because there is no comprehensive measure of economic activity, such as the monthly GDP for each of our provinces and territories, with which to compare these experimental indexes. And as a consequence, we stress that these indexes should be viewed as a composite of a range of economic activity indicators, that they should be treated as experimental rather than as a measure of GDP. And the quality of the indexes will continue to be assessed in collaboration with our data users and academics as they're updated monthly, and I believe they'll strengthen over time. And the decision to cancel or maintain this experimental product or promote it as an official statistic is something that we'll make in March of next year. So now let's look at, yes.
Anil, sorry, just saying that you should move towards wrapping up.
All right, sounds good. Let's see. Well, perhaps I'll skip the next couple of examples and encourage you to have a look at the slides. Let me just move on to slide 25, if I could. By linking this, the infrastructure to demography information from the census, labor force surveys, and the Canadian productivity accounts, we can also see how the production infrastructure, just as an example, assets affects the labor force. So we're able to answer questions on full-time versus part-time work, variations by industry, the hours worked, earnings, etc. We are also determining the impacts on the environment using that as an example. So we're looking at detailed investment estimates by province and territory, by producing industry that can be linked to greenhouse gas emissions from the Canadian system of environmental economic accounts. And this will determine the level of GHG emissions per value added of infrastructure investments. We're linking environmental and clean technology product economic accounts to determine the proportion of clean tech inputs into the construction of infrastructure assets. We did in 2019 released a new experimental framework with accompanying estimates how to measure the value of databases and data science in Canada. And I encourage you to look at the results of that, I would say, first in the world activity. Let me move on to how important is data? Just to build on that product, slide 29, Aaron. Investment in data has been increasing rapidly in recent years. Canadian investment in data, databases, and data science was estimated to be as high as $40 billion. As I mentioned earlier, this was greater than the annual investment in industrial machinery, transportation equipment, and research and development combined, and represents 12% of total non-residential investment in 2018. An upper limit, the value of stock of data, databases, and data science in Canada was pegged at $217 billion in 2018, which is roughly equivalent to the stock of all other intellectual property products in Canada. We really, collaboration and co-investment, I think is really, really required across and beyond national boundaries. This crisis has provided a very concrete illustration of how new partnerships and collaborations between various actors of the national statistical system is going to be vital to produce relevant and timely information to support the crisis response. And like many NSOs, we're going beyond our strict production boundaries of data. We're working with our public health officials. As I mentioned earlier, we are working with our Public Health Agency of Canada to assess the models of the current state of inventory and the future need for personal protective equipment. These are data stewardship types of activities where we're bringing our expertise to the table that go beyond our traditional role of providing data and our insights. And so to conclude, I think there is still much more work to be done. So I leave you with a few key takeaways. The world was globalizing, obviously, before COVID-19, and we need to monitor how this is evolving. User expectations have changed, and we need to keep up. And ultimately, an integrated approach with coordination between national statistical offices and international statistical organizations is going to be vital and key. If there's one thing that COVID-19 has shown us, it's that we are all connected, and we need to work together to find solutions for the betterment of humanity. So on that note, I want to thank you again, congratulate you again for this conference. And I look forward to the outcome of the discussions and if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Anil, thank you very much for this presentation. It's been fascinated. I have no idea you could use wastewater to measure cannabis consumption. It's really, really, really very interesting. We have some questions. I think before I move on, I actually want to ask you something that you jump up in some of these slides. My question is about the collaboration between the Statistic Canada with the Bank of Canada. Is there something you want to say, how it works? Because as you can see, you're producing these monthly indicators really fast. So I think that's a great interest for policymakers.
Well, thank you for that question. We, of course, we have many partners, and some that I would argue are a little more important than others. And so our collaboration with the bank is really, really critical. You know, we are working with them right now on how do we update expenditures, looking at basket weights. Obviously, there's been a lot of debate about how consumption patterns have changed in the current context, and whether the CPI is still really reflective of of real change. So obviously we're seeing some parts of our consumption decrease in a fairly substantive way. Transportation, looking at obviously the travel and accommodation, food services areas, but we've also seen investments in other areas go up. And I would say, how do we collectively do two things? One is make sure that the data is robust enough for the kind of policy the bank needs to make, the monetary policies that are absolutely crucial that align with the fiscal policies of the government. And two is, how do we make sure that the indicators like the CPI still hold value and that people believe in them, even though they might be seeing and remembering, certain parts of that equation where prices go up and maybe not paying as much attention to, where they're going down, or even consumption patterns and how they're unequal depending upon, where you might sit in the socioeconomic kind of spectrum with regards to your income. So these are really vital periods. Our relationship with the bank has always been strong, just like, I think it would be the case there. But what we're doing is, we're sharing data. They have data on people's perceptions, the confidence levels. They have aggregate data on consumption. And we're working together to say, how do we build the confidence in the indicators that people, are impacted with as a result of the monetary decisions that are made. So I hope that helps answer some of that question.
Thank you, Anil. So we have a question in the Q&A by Alex Romanko. And again, if there are more people that would like to ask questions, please feel free to type them in the Q&A, and then we can unlock your microphone and you can ask directly.
Yeah, thank you for giving me a chance to ask the question. Thank you for presentation. It was really wonderful. So the question in short is, are you concerned about the security side of all this measurement? Because obviously security concerns goes hand in hand with advancements in measurements methods. So for example, in the case of GPS tracking devices that you shown that there are only car IDs and vehicle IDs, and you are saying it's not identifiable. Well, my concern is that in essence you have latitude and longitude of each vehicle, and it can be easily identified because you exactly know where the point on the map is. You can just go there and see what kind of vehicle it is. So the broad question is, do you think it's possible, and is there a risk that security losses would outstand the benefits from all these new measurement approaches?
Thank you for that question. And it's a question that I would say we're seized with at Statistics Canada, and I would argue many other statistical agencies as well. As you know, traditionally statistical agencies have looked at saying, well, the more data that we have at the input stage, the better, because we have legal restrictions on what we can disseminate. We have good processes. We have good measures to protect both privacy and confidentiality. So, the more we can access at the initial stage, the better. And I would argue that that's shifting in a fairly fundamental way. It's not that we don't know how to measure, how to protect privacy and confidentiality. I would say that what we need to do is to bring a lot of that, the scientific rigor, the processes, the measurement, the protections at the input stage or the ingestion stage of data. And in Canada, we are working on principles of proportionality and necessity. So we're saying for the purpose for which we are collecting these data, what is the amount of data? And we are being far more transparent with what we are collecting, why we're collecting it, the measures that we're putting in place to protect the confidentiality and the privacy. And clearly, what we disseminate, it goes through rigorous review to make sure that there is no misuse of that kind of information. And even within the agency, I would argue, we are taking measures to limit, how much any one area or any individual would have. So privacy and confidentiality. So privacy in the case of individual data, confidentiality in the case of business data, are both, I would say, hallmarks of statistical agencies. And what we're doing is redoubling our efforts and working very, very closely with our respective privacy offices and privacy officers, so that we can make sure that we continue that balance between the value that we generate from using sensitive data and the protection of individual privacy and confidentiality, and that we retain the trust of our population that we are using those data responsibly.
We have now a question by Martin Will.
Thank you very much for a fascinating talk. One particular issue that I wondered whether you could clarify: has the epidemic thrown up any issues concerning your legal framework? Or to put it another way, are there things that you would have liked to have done and have the capacity to do to inform the public about the progress of the economy or society during the epidemic, but you're not allowed to?
Well, thank you very much for that question, Martin. I do think that greater clarity in the authorities vested in NSOs, and I speak for Statistics Canada, would be helpful. So I think many of our legislative pieces are written, I would say primarily in an era of surveys, and so they are at times not as clear, or in some cases even silent, on access to alternate sources of data. And not that I think, as I just answered in the previous question, that we should have free reign. We should be transparent and we should be responsible and be able to demonstrate that. But I think greater clarity in some of the legal frameworks around the ability to access, I think is really, really important. I have to say, I find it a bit strange that organizations that are not statistical agencies that have access to tremendous amounts of data can put out statistics, whether it's the consumption patterns, credit, tracking and movement of people, or whatever it is, and statistical agencies can't, or at least have to go through a lot of hoops. So the efficient flow, if you like, of some of those alternate sources of data for statistical purposes with strict as I said, procedures and protocols in place in a transparent way are something that we need to work towards. And it's I would argue, not just an individual country that should be doing that based on an individual data source, but I believe it's an opportunity for the international statistical community to stand up and demonstrate that our sole purpose is that of public good, and these types of enabling functions, should be there, and of course the checks and balances that go along with it. I also believe that in the legal framework, greater clarity on access to microdata for research and academics, and being able to build data trust models so that we can bring the expertise to the data in environments that protect, again, the confidentiality and privacy. Those kinds of things would speak to our data stewardship role and that facilitation role are really, really key as we try to look at the interplay between the social and health and other outcomes, mental health, you name it, and the the economic implications. So to create those kinds of environments where the NSO can play a role, of standardization of data, on facilitating data access, I think are things that in many cases are either missing or silent in many of our legislative constructs. And I would say that this pandemic has demonstrated the risks of not being able to do that, or being able to do it in less than an efficient manner. So I hope that just gives you a couple of examples where I think we need to think about going forward.
Thank you very much.
I think we should move towards wrapping up. I have Sanjeev, you have your hand up. Is there anything very quickly you want to ask?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ah, right. Okay. Thanks, Anna, and thank you very much for that, Anil. Very good, rich presentation. I've got three very quick aspects. The cannabis was really interesting, and I think it might be worth touching on how you collected information on prices from society and households and social media. That's fascinating, because obviously it's branching out into a new realm. The environmental accounts is very important for me in terms of how it integrates with the national accounts, and there's a powerful feedback loop linking the two together in terms of economic statistics. I don't know if you want to comment on that. And then more globally, for example, I did some analysis on global value chains, lots of them. The wheat sown, grown and harvested in Canada was then not able to be shipped to Italy, not able to be converted into pasta, and I struggled to get pasta off my shelves in the shops in London. So what that also illustrated was, on a global scale, the statistical offices need to be much more joined up. So the concept of a nation and nations' economic statistics is becoming maybe dated while the world is globalized. So my question to you is, on the global stage, what is the vision that you may have in terms of data sharing, data exchange, and data reconciliation?
Well, excellent. And I know the organizers want to move on. I do believe that international organizations have a role to play. Where national statistical offices or even countries are limited in the ability to get cross-border information, and especially from organizations that are now set up to be data gatherers in the international sphere. There has to be a model where it's collect once and use many times to be able to answer those very questions that you talked about, which is the fragility of those supply chains, and the pricing of PPEs, and as we see a dramatic shift in where things are produced and domestic industries coming up, and so I do believe that we need, in addition to the NSOs, we need international organizations that actually can be stewards of the types of data that, as you said, we are all interdependent upon, and we can't wait months and years to get at some of those trends. We need a lot of that information in real time, because like you said, it's not just about whether you can eat pasta or not, but in many cases it's about, are we going to be able to get a device or a medicine which can have some very, very severe consequences of inequality or equity or access. So I do think that there is room for greater collaboration. On the other 2 points, we'd be happy to perhaps send me an email, and be happy to connect you with a couple of my colleagues on both the cannabis and the environmental economic accounts. Thank you.
I think I'm gonna have to finish this. There's still a question, but I think I'm gonna have to finish this because we're getting over time. Just to say thank you, Anil. Thank you very much for your talk. Thank you for addressing all the questions made here. It's been fascinating to learn what is Statistics Canada have been done on the last years, and I think we like to thank you in the name of the organizers and everyone that attended this session for your talk. Thank you very much. And I want to invite again everyone to attend the poster sessions in the posters hall and talk with the post presentations after that. So thank you, Anil.
Thank you very much, and all the best for the rest of the session. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.